everybody for joining us for today's webcast. As Catherine mentioned, it features Michael Tamblin, who's EVP of Content Sales and Merchandising at Kobo. And I guess the great thing about Kobo in my mind is that unlike a lot of other e-book retailers, Kobo not only gathers but shares information about the trends that they're seeing out there in the marketplace and what their customers are up to. And that's what this webcast is all about. So Michael has gone ahead and summarized some of Kobo's more interesting findings for his presentation today. So I'll hand it over to you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Joe, and thanks for everyone who helped to put this together. I now have sort of a series of about 6 different windows open in front of me, so I feel vaguely like a currency trader while I'm giving this presentation. And it is all about data and about sort of the richness of information that we're starting to see as we begin to gather more and more customers in the digital space, and as we start to deliver books to them through a lot of different devices in a lot of different places. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. And so I'm going to move reasonably fast through the slides that I have. This is going to be a true test of this webcasting system to see whether or not this will actually keep up, and then we'll leave lots of time for questions at the end. So I am Michael Tamblin, as Joe said, and there's where you can get to me on Twitter. I am the EVP of Content Sales and Merchandising for Kobo. That means I spend all of my time working with publishers and content, getting it, figuring out how best to sell it, how to arrange it, merchandise it, price it, and look at the customers that we're getting through it and figure out how to serve them better. We've got about 30 minutes together, and so in that time, I'm hoping that we really can look at 4 users that we've pulled out of the data that we're seeing every day, and use those 4 users to kind of examine how we look at the customers that we have who are readers, look at kind of the behavior of reading, look at how they're reading, and really, this is sort of answering the question of what happens when you give a group of reading-obsessed technophiles and allow them to get their hands on probably the richest data set that we've ever seen in the history of the book industry. So never before have we been able to see so much about how people consume, how people read, what they read, as we have today. And so I'll talk a little bit about Kobo and who we are. We are a global ebook retailer. We sell ebooks all around the world. When I first put these slides together for Tools of Change, we were just over 2 million users. Since then, we've actually grown. We're now sort of 3.7 million users, I think, growing very, very quickly. And we are on any given day, delivering books into almost 200 countries around the world. The UN doesn't actually recognize 200 countries, but we have 200 ISO country codes that we've delivered books to. And we are one of the most popular reading apps for iPhone, iPad. We were the first to deliver e-reading experiences to the BlackBerry. We were the first to set up an ebook store for Android. We were the first to bring e-reading to the cloud, and we were the first to reprice the e-ink market in May of 2010. If you remember back, to kind of this time last year, most e-ink devices were kind of sitting north of $250. We brought out the first Kobo e-reader, brought the price down to $149, and all of a sudden made e-reading available to a lot more people. And continue to do that by making e-reading devices more accessible, easier to use. We've just brought out our new Touch Edition at basically $130, and continue to try and find ways to make e-reading as accessible and enjoyable as possible. We are absolutely obsessed with learning about the customer through the data that we see. For us, these sort of streams of information that come to us are are like the periscope that we use to kind of drive the submarine that is Kobo. It's the only way that we have to see this customer. We have no physical stores. We have no way to kind of see and talk to this person directly. So this is kind of the first way that we were able to. This is the best way that we have to be able to get a sense of who this customer is. We spend a lot of time carving customers up into segments, and so that we can get a sense of who they are and how we behave. And we look at things like where they live and where they buy. We look at the reading platforms that they're on. We look at the different prices that they tend to consume content at. We look at their reading history and how that influences what they may buy in the future. We look at their overall lifetime value in relation to some of those. So, we're looking at what's a customer who reads on iPad worth relative to a customer who reads on e-ink, and what's the difference in terms of behavior of someone that we picked up 6 months ago versus someone that we just got a week or a couple of weeks ago. We look at that balance between free and paid. A lot of free content that we deliver, a lot of paid ebooks that we sell as well, and we're constantly looking at the mix between those two in terms of people's consumption patterns. And it can get really complicated really quickly because we're trying to figure out what's the difference between a UK iPad user who's primarily interested in romance fiction versus a US e-ink customer who has a 50% mix of free and paid, and we have to figure out how to serve all of those different kinds of customers well. And one of the ways that we do that is by kind of building out these personas that we start to look at, we start to attach different sorts of data to, so that we can kind of organize our thinking around our customers. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, are these sort of 4 users who are representative of some of the different kinds of customers that we have. And they look like this, or at least they look like this to the extent that I was able to go onto a site and use a free Wii avatar generator to create them. And so these are sort of 4 different representative Kobo customers. And I'm going to take you through them and sort of give you a sense of how we look at some of these different customers. So the first one that we have here, we call the voracious e-ink reader. And she has a number of different attributes, and I'm going to kind of take you through what they are. She is what we call a Gold A customer, and that means that she is sitting in the most valuable sort of lifetime value cohort that we have. We break our customers into sort of 3 big buckets, and gold, silver, and bronze, and gold being the highest value, and then we have segments within that. So a Gold A customer is a fantastically valuable customer to us. That value looks like this. A Gold A customer will show up on their first day as a new customer, and that first round of purchases that they do will be about $35 worth of ebooks. And when you consider that the average ebook sells for somewhere between, let's say, $7.50 and $8.50, this is someone who the first time they show up is buying 3 or 4 or 5 different books sometimes, or 1 or 2 or 3 sort of bestsellers, and then every time they show up after that, they are spending another $25, and they do this around 7 times a month. So this is someone who is reading almost continuously. This is someone who is basically going through a book every couple of days or every 3 days, and has reading as kind of the primary sort of recreational activity in their life, if you kind of figure out how long it will take somebody to read that many books. And so this is a customer, obviously, we pay a lot of attention to. They are reading on the second generation Kobo eReader. They were probably someone who bought the first one and then upgraded to the second one. And that Kobo eReader is our most productive sales channel in terms of conversion. So by conversion, I mean the likelihood that when they show up to visit, it will result in a purchase. The web is our most powerful conversion channel, primarily primarily because all of our SEM directs there, all of our SEO directs there, and all of our direct email marketing directs there. So web is always kind of the most powerful place where sales happen. But after that, the e-reader is the second most. And people who read on e-readers are more likely to buy than anyone else that we have. And this is a person who became our customer in June of 2010. So they've been around for a while. And that's something that we're starting to see, is that this customer is, sorry, let me back up. The time that this customer has shown up starts to tell us a lot about how much they buy. So one of the things that we're starting to see is that as we're picking up new customers, purchase frequency is increasing. So ebook buying is accelerating. And so what I mean by that is a customer who started in June of 2010 buys 44% more in their first month than a customer who started in December 2009 when Kobo first began. So in that first month, kind of the first time they show up, they're buying 44% more, somebody who showed up in June. Somebody who showed up in November of this year by 70% more. So again, these customers, as we're getting new customers on, they're buying more in their first week all the time. And there are lots of reasons for that. Our apps are better than they were, 6 months ago or a year ago. The devices themselves are better. We're getting better at marketing. We're getting a better sense of how to motivate people and kind of put good books in front of them. We have more titles, so we just have more books that we can sell people. And we've seen that every time we make the catalog bigger, people find more things to buy. But we're also getting better customers. And by that, I mean that we're picking up more and more of those people who, would be considered passionate book buyers. We've kind of come past people who are looking at e-reading primarily as a kind of a technology early adopter, and now we're really looking at people who are motivated to join digital reading because it makes their kind of reading life better. So as we're seeing this transition from print to digital, one of the things that I think a lot of us have found surprising is how fast it's accelerating. And one of the reasons that transition from print to digital is accelerating so quickly, and we're starting to see publishers saying, 15% of my sales are now in digital, 20% of my sales are now in digital, isn't necessarily because we're getting 20% of all readers moved over to digital, but we are getting more and more of those customers who buy a lot, including customers like this one. Somebody who's showing up and buying 2 or 3 books at a time, 7 times a month, is a fantastically productive customer. And they probably used to go into a bricks and mortar bookstore, but they aren't now. This is a reader who buys a lot of fiction, and when we look at fiction sales relative to all other categories of sales that we have, ebook sales are still very, very much about recreational reading. And which sounds ironic, as I'm sort of sitting nestled within the infrastructure of O'Reilly, one of the great nonfiction ebook sellers. But what I think we were initially very surprised at when we started to work in this market was, people really want to read stories in digital, and that far outweighs any other category that we sell in. And when you add juvenile and young adult in, a lot of which is fiction as well, that big green ball of fiction gets even bigger. There are a lot of opportunities for growth around this, and I think one of the things that we'll talk about in a bit is how tablets are starting to open up some of these other, especially nonfiction categories. This is also someone who buys almost everything that she reads, and we'll see that isn't necessarily the case in some of the other customers that we're looking at. So that was our voracious e-ink reader. And now I'm going to show you a different customer who is a small screen reader. This is someone who is reading on a smartphone, is reading on an iPhone, or reading on an Android phone. The cohort that we put them into is bronze E. It's sort of the gold, silver, bronze classification. They're sitting in the bottom third of the customers that we have in terms of value, but it is the largest in terms of numbers. We have a huge number of these customers. And a bronze customer, kind of shows up on the first day and, buys on average about $15 worth of ebooks. And then every time he or she shows up, spends about another $11 and does that about once a month. And so we have a lot of these people on a lot of different platforms who kind of exhibit this behavior. This person is reading on an iPhone, and iPhone is actually our least productive sales channel in terms of percentage conversion. And this is despite the fact that we have possibly the highest rated app in terms of sort of customer sat on iPhone in App Store. Really, really popular, a huge number of downloads, really good reviews. But the customer who's on a small screen device, is on a smartphone device, just behaves differently. And also generally buys cheaper books than someone who's buying on a larger screen or who is buying on e-ink. So there's a lower price point tolerance in general. And they also don't tend to, so the price point tolerance kind of looks like this. We see iPhone and BlackBerry kind of sitting at the bottom of the actual selling price curve. An average iPhone purchase is about $7.42 for us. BlackBerry, interestingly, is even lower at $6.81. And then we see Android sort of sitting in the middle at about $7.85. And one of the reasons that they sit in the middle is that they also straddle two formats. We have Android users who are on smartphones, and we also have Android users who are on tablets. And then at the top of the curve, on iPad and Kobo eReader, is the highest price point tolerance. So about $8.84 for iPad and about $8.50 for e-ink devices. And then you'll see that the web is essentially the same as the average. The reason for that is that people go to the web to do their purchasing regardless of which platform they read on. So the web ends up being kind of a blended average of everything that's bought across all of the other platforms. This small screen e-reader customer we got in November of 2010. And then there was a reasonably good chance that they didn't stick around for a really long time. Small screen device users churn off quite quickly. So they'll come, they'll buy a little bit, and then they'll often go away. We won't see them for 60 days. We won't see them for 90 days. And then they'll pop back up again. One of the things that we learned as we got into this was we were kind of using a fairly standard e-commerce churn metric when we first started. We were kind of looking at 90-day activity. And we found that actually wasn't long enough, that if we expanded a scope from 90 days to 120 days, a lot of these people would come back. It's just that they would come in, they would buy 1 or 2 or 3 books, and then they would go away and we wouldn't see them for a while they read through those 1 or 2 or 3 books. And as soon as they were done, then they'd show up again. But still is, of the platforms that we work on, the ones where users are likely to sort of leave the fastest. So at the bottom we have iPhone and BlackBerry users. We have the interesting situation of sort of iPad being relatively low, where people will show up, they'll install the app, they'll start to buy, and then a percentage of those will leave us and will go on to something else, or are trying out e-reading on iPad in general and then leaving and going away. Android kind of sits in the middle, interestingly enough, and then those e-ink devices, whether they're ours or someone else's, tend to sit at the top. When people have actually made that hardware investment, they stay around and they sort of stick with you. We see in small screens especially, not just a focus on fiction. We see a lot of people reading romance, and if we look at all of the fiction categories that we sell, romance is sort of second only to general fiction in terms of the frequency of purchase. It's a huge, huge category for us, and especially on smartphones. And then this is a customer who has a mix of paid content, the stuff that they bought, and free content, so public domain stuff or works that have been made available for free by the publisher. In the middle between these two, we have a customer that we call the iPad Socialite. And this is a Gold B customer, so not as good as the one who is on the e-ink screen, but almost as good. And they are good because their value to us kind of looks like this. They are a Gold customer. Their first day they're worth about $22. Their average is worth about $16 after that. They come back slightly more than every week to make their purchases. And they are a customer who's reading on iPad. They came to us around December 2010, and there's a reason for that. Our iPad apps started to get really popular after December of 2010 because we introduced our social layer for iPad called Reading Life. And so Reading Life kind of sits in and around our regular reading experience. As you read, it starts to generate a statistical profile of kind of how you read, and it starts to give you some of that information back so you can get a sense of how many books you have open and what they are and how many pages you've read. It gives you a sense of the number of total hours you've spent reading and how many hours per book. It gives you sort of a histogram of what your reading times through the day are. So it's kind of taking a commonplace thing like reading and starting to give you more information back. We also have awards and badging that are associated with Reading Life. So if you exhibit certain kinds of behaviors, or you do certain kinds of things, good things happen to you. So we could tell you that, hey, you've just bought 5 books by this particular author. This is something that we're going to recognize you for. That's then something that you can share out to your social network. You can kind of let people know that you've done this thing. We also kind of maintain a timeline of your reading life. Every highlight that you've made, every annotation that you've made, every book that you've opened or closed or finished, all this is in this chronology of everything that you've done. So you can sort of look back through your reading history and go, oh yeah, that was that time that I was burning through all of those science fiction novels, or this was the time when I was reading only Proust. And everything that you see in Reading Life can be shared socially. So you can either talk about a particular book that you're reading or a particular passage within it. It goes out into Facebook. It can become a conversation with the people within your social graph. And all of that is about sort of giving people a window into what your daily kind of reading behavior looks like. And it's all completely optional. You can turn it off and you can put it away if you don't like it. But a lot of people got into it, and it's been driving huge numbers of downloads for us. The other thing that it's allowed us to do is start to look not just at kind of the social sharing that goes around saying, I've just started reading a book or I've just bought a book, but we can start to do some interesting things inside the book. So part of Reading Life is, you could be going through a book and you'll see this little pink pin in the corner of the margin. And it isn't very big and it isn't very obtrusive, but it's there. And if you click on it, you'll see that it's a part of a set of functionality we have called Faces and Places. And that allows you to either check in or share about a particular place in a book, which could be an actual geographical place in the book. You could have reached a particular locale or location or city or home within a book. You could have met a particular character for the first time. And all of this then can also be communicated out to your social graph. And what we were trying to do here was kind of give people a way to talk not just about I am reading this book and I really like it, but to create a dialogue around particular characters or particular places, and do that with kind of the social sharing context in mind. And we did that initially for iPad, and we just rolled it out for iPhone 2. It's now going to be showing up on the new generation of Kobo e-readers and on Android tablets as well. And when we first put this out, there were a lot of people who said, really no one's going to care about this. This is people are really interested in a truly immersive reading experience. You really shouldn't mess with that. And yet what we found was that putting the social into the context of reading was actually immensely popular. And about 98% of iPad and iPhone customers that kind of access Reading Life on a regular basis. And one of the things that we were starting to look at was, so what things do people find most interesting to share? And far and away, if you give people an award, you give people a badge for doing something in particular, they love to share that with other people. So that far and away is the thing that we see most often with shared content. The next being that they're starting a new book, and the next after that being the sharing of individual passages or particular things that they've found of interest, and then it kind of tails off from there. The sharing of faces and places data sits at the very bottom of this list, but only because we've only done a couple of books. We kind of did a 5-book trial and basically put them in the library at random, didn't put any promotion around them, didn't highlight them, just to kind of see what would happen. And so it does generate almost sort of 4% of the total sharing traffic that goes on within Reading Life just by people finding it accidentally, which we found really interesting. And now we're going back to publishers and starting to do a lot more with it. But the other thing that people asked us when we started doing Reading Life was, well, does any of this actually matter? It's a distraction from reading. It probably takes people away from reading. And what we found is actually the opposite, is that people who are doing Reading Life actually spend more time in-app. They spend more time reading, and not just a little bit more. They spend something like 50% more. So that question that had sort of been hanging around of, do you sort of mess up the sort of the enjoyment of the printed word by putting the possibility for social interaction around the reading experience, turns out to not be the case, which we're really happy with. But it means people spend 50% more time in books and reading books and kind of engaged in the content directly when they've hooked themselves up to a social experience and are kind of sharing that information with their friends. The other thing that Reading Life has given us is that we're starting to get a sense of what reading behavior looks like at different times of day. So we give badges if you are someone who consistently reads at a particular time. So if you are someone that reads between 7 and 9 a.m., we give you the Kill the Commute badge. And if you're someone who reads kind of late at night, we give you the Better in Bed badge. And if you're kind of a 12 to 1, a 12 to 2 p.m. person, we'll give you 8 books for lunch. And in the course of awarding those, we've started to get a sense of kind of when people read, which is sort of interesting. And it also allows us to sort of test some of the assumptions that we've had around when we thought people read to when they actually do. And so one of the sort of, I think, the commonly held assumptions within the book industry was that that reading is really a kind of, bed and bath phenomenon. It happens at the end of the day. There's that sort of proverbial stack of books by the bedside table. And that's where reading happens. And then, you might get kind of bits and pieces, little slices of time throughout the day, but, really kind of the evening is when this goes on. And so we were able to look at awarding, what were the badges that we were awarding and what was the volume of badges that we were awarding to kind of give a sense of when people read and how much they read. And then we could look at the total time spent reading to see kind of what was going on there. And so one of the things that we found out that was absolutely shocking to us was that when we look at the average time that people spend reading versus the kind of award that they got, we could get a sense of, which readers read for a long time and which readers read for a short time. And it turned out that those people that were sort of reading during the day, so the people that are reading sort of between 7 and 9 a.m. in the morning, are reading 47 to 48% more than average. The people that are reading from 9 a.m. to noon are reading about 45% more than average. The people reading at lunchtime are kind of about 35% more than average, and the people reading sort of between 2 and 4 p.m. in the afternoon are reading about 20% more than average. So the people that are reading during the day are the ones who are reading, by far the longest. The people that are reading at night being sort of between 6 and 8 p.m. and between 12 and 1 a.m. And between 8 and 10 p.m. and between 10 and 12 p.m. Are reading much less than average. And that 10 to 12 p.m., which we kind of thought was the sweet spot of reading, is between 30% and 45% less than average, which was completely different than what we thought. So readers who are reading at night tend to be reading for a fairly short period of time. Books for them really are kind of the tranquilizer that they put up in front of them. They read for 15 minutes and then they go to sleep. Whereas the person who's reading on the commute on the way into work, is reading for a much longer period of time. But then the thing that sort of reinforced that idea of the nighttime reader as being sort of the engine of the industry is that the number of people reading at night and so, reading in that sort of 6 to 9 p.m. Is much, much higher. So a lot of people do their reading from 10 to 12 p.m. at night and from 8 to 10 p.m. at night. They just don't read very long when they do it. So that's the kind of information that we're starting to get a sense of as we slice some of this data. The other thing that we've had a very clear sense of early on is that sort of 8 p.m. to midnight is prime time for ebooks. So at a time when people usually don't go out to the bookstore, at a time when most bookstores are closed, people will get to the end of one book and they'll go back to Kobo's ebook store and they'll buy another one. And that's what a lot of that purchase frequency is being driven from, the idea that you finish a book, you can go buy another, and you can start reading right away. And that 8 p.m. to midnight is when a lot of that happens. It's our busiest time of day by far. So all of that looking at that particular iPad user is also to get a sense of kind of what we've been learning out of putting social into iPad. We put it into iPad first, basically as an experiment. We had no idea if it was going to work at all. And since then, we've rolled it out across most of the mobile platforms. The last user I'm going to show you, in the kind of couple of minutes that we have left, is the Freegan. And the Freegan is a source of wonderment and mystery to us. The Freegan sort of sits at the bottom of kind of the value stack for us. They are below bronze F. They are basically sort of zero value to us as a customer, but they are fascinating to us as a customer at the same time. We kind of look at them as the dark matter of e-reading. They acquire almost all of their content through the website, and access through the web far more than from any of the other mobile platforms that we have. And they're all about books that they can get for $0. And so that could be public domain, that could be commercial works that the publishers have priced to $0. They are primarily taking these books and they're side-loading them onto devices. They like it because they can build a large library with very little investment. The other thing that we've learned about them is they're very, very international. We have people who kind of look at e-reading primarily as a way to read books for free, and a lot of those are coming from developing world. And so, they kind of see this as this first access to a huge amount of content that really wasn't available to them before. And we move a lot of books out that way. But not everyone who reads free books is a Freegan. A Freegan is actually a very particular kind of customer. So we have lots of Freegans who are also pagans, or we have lots of free consumers who are also pagans. We have customers who, when we look at customers with free books, lots of customers have one free book. They basically treat free ebook as kind of their training wheels as they get a sense of, how do I do this e-reading stuff? And, you have some who can, find a couple of books. They might be the ones who really love Jane Austen, and, so they're going to read Sense and Sensibility, and then they're going to read Pride and Prejudice, or they're going to read Dracula, and they're going to read Sherlock Holmes, and then they go on and they find other more current books that they want to read. But at the sort of at the other end of that continuum, you have the freegans, people who are really trying to amass a library of free books. And when we break down that particular group, the people who have sort of 9 or more free books, we sort of see that there's some interesting variation there. We find that a lot of people, can't find more than, kind of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 free books that they actually want to have in their library. And those are sort of the core of the freegan market. But then beyond that, we have, freegan librarians. We have people who are really interested in amassing a collection of books, or like every free book that they can find in a particular category. And then way at the end, we have people with, kind of 100 or more who are really sort of freegan hoarders. They are people who just want to see the shelves packed with books, as many as they can get, as many as they can find. And so we have people literally with thousands of free books, even though they're freely available at any time, and just loading their libraries full of this stuff. Freegans are also shockingly resistant to marketing. They really are all about finding that book that you can get for nothing. And we've run all kinds of experiments to see if we can turn a freegan into a pagan, and it turns out it's actually really difficult to do. If you give them a $2 coupon, they will go and they find a $2 book and turn it into a free book. If you give them a 20% off coupon, more often than not, they'll leave it alone because then they can't turn something into free. So those are 4 customers that we have, and 4 different kinds of users that we have. And why are we doing all of this? All of this segmentation, all of this analysis. Really, for us, we've realized that we have this very broad range of customers who look at e-reading in very different ways. For some people, it's all about how do I make my ongoing, almost fanatical sort of reading experience better? How can I make it more convenient? How can I make it easier to get books and then kind of bring them into my life? For some people, it's all about the social experience and being able to share their reading life. For some people, it's about kind of reading on the go in short segments in kind of bits of borrowed time. And for some, it's all about getting stuff for free. And so with all of these, we're looking at, how can we make that reading experience better? As an ebook retailer, we aren't just responsible for kind of putting books on the shelves and getting people to take them to the checkout. We're responsible for the whole reading experience, how books look and how pages turn and how shelves look. And so by looking at these different kinds of customers, we can make sure that when we're kind of doing our development and we're planning our products and we're bringing new products out, that we can keep all of these different kinds of needs in mind. And our feeling has always been that the better we know the reader, the better we internalize what they care about, the sales will follow. And that was a whirlwind tour of 145 slides in 40 minutes. And so now I'm happy to take any questions.
So, Michael, this is Joe again, and on behalf of everyone, thank you so much. And I just want to say, wow, my head's kind of spinning. And I mentioned in the group chat window here, this is one of those rare webcasts where I've taken a whole bunch of notes, but I'm sure I'm going to have to go back and watch the archived version of this just to pick up all the pieces that I missed. So, and as Catherine and others have mentioned here in the chat window, we'll have that up in the next day or two so folks can go back to it. But so there's been just a whole bunch of questions that have come in, Michael, and I've kind of sat down and picked, I think, some of the better ones in the limited time that we have. Well, not the better ones, but I think some of the more common ones that folks are asking. The first one, and you kind of covered this briefly on the social side of things, but the question from Jonathan is, are your customers expressing a desire for a more social reading experience? And clearly it would seem to me that there's probably those that really embrace that and those that want to have nothing to do with it. But, to paraphrase Jonathan's question a little bit here, are you finding that more of your customers are asking for this, and are they looking for even more social functionality than what you have built in today?
Generally, yes. I think when we rolled it out, you could see a lot of people kind of kicking the tires and getting a sense of how it worked. starting to get kind of excited about the different awards that they could get, and then immediately start pinging us for it to do more. So we started with Facebook integration, and then it immediately was, well, I've got to hook this up to Twitter too. So we rolled that out as well, and now it's both Facebook and Twitter. Now there are a lot of requests for, can I plug this into my specific book-focused social network. There's also people wanting to give much more visibility to their social graph on kind of their general day-to-day reading activity. So can I show people my shelf of books, and can I show them kind of the gallery of different awards that I've won. And then the last part that we get we're getting a lot of requests for is, how do I utilize my social graph to give me better recommendations? Because, we can tell people the people who bought this book also bought this book, but what I really want to know is, do people that I like, what are they reading, and what can I pick up from them? And every time that we've done surveys or focus groups and looked at where people get their recommendations from and where they trust, recommendations from their friends and people that they know rank miles above anything else that you can put in front of them in terms of decision support. And so all of those are things that we'll be pushing on in the weeks and months to come.
I'm so glad that you brought that last part up, because I really tend to believe that the social aspect of search is just going to become more and more important, and clearly that's something Facebook is trying to leverage. So however it can address sort of the discoverability issue within our world, I think all the better, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So next question I've got here, and this was one of the topics in a sneak peek webcast we did earlier this week, has to do with micropayments. And the question from Amanda is, have any of your customers expressed an interest in a micropayment model where maybe they would pay per chapter or per page as opposed to for the entire work?
It's interesting because when Kobo first began, and when we were originally incubated inside a bricks and mortar chain called Indigo, we were called Short Covers, and that project name came from kind of an initial thesis that with mobile devices being so prevalent and with people reading on the go, that what they would want to read would be, kind of short content, that they would want to read, a chapter or an article or a passage or, basically kind of bite-sized content consumption. And so, we did a lot of work to talk publishers into the idea of being able to sort of sell books by the chapter or chop them up, or articles that were kind of in individual bite-sized servings, put that out in front of people, and then found that far and away what they actually wanted was long-form content. That as soon as you put that in front of people, they're like, okay, yeah, that's great. When can I read Twilight? Or when can I read The Remains of the Day? That the idea that things were going to be read in mobile and things were going to be read in short slices of time actually had nothing to do with the kind of content that people wanted to read. And so we still have short content available for sale. We still have kind of articles and short works. But sale by the chapter, the consumer actually had almost no interest in. They wanted a one chapter or more free sample so that they could get a sense of whether they liked the work or not. And then, they really wanted to buy it and read it and consume it, and definitely not be forced into any sort of interruption of a transaction at a time. It was, we went okay, and then basically dropped that as a primary means of picking up new customers for a focus on sort of full-length books and larger works. But yeah, it was, that was something that we kind of actively explored early on that turned out just not to be the case.
Yeah, and I can see where that would be kind of coming through in your results. And I'm thinking of myself now as a consumer, and when I think about the samples that I download before I make a purchase, and I always do that before I buy a book. I read the sample first. There are some cases where it passed muster based on the short sample, and then I got maybe a third of the way into it, and I wished I hadn't bought it. So that's maybe where that sort of micropayment model could really come in handy, that I don't have to pay for the whole thing, right?
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's kind of a hidden fear inside publishers, kind of around, how many books actually get finished. And if you turn this over to a per chapter payment, would you find that you're actually making less money because a lot of books kind of get 4 or 5 or 6 chapters in and then people walk away. And I mean, reading usage and reading consumption is something that we spend a lot of time analyzing, and I'm actually sort of spinning up a research project right now to look at, how long does it take people, how many people get to the end?
Yeah, and speaking of sample content, we've got a question from Dan. He's wondering if there's any indication that books with initial free chapters sell better or convert better to sales than those without. And I guess related to that, I would wonder, is there any correlation between the length of that free content? So, do the longer ones tend to sell better than the ones with very short pieces of free content?
Well, it's interesting because we certainly see a conversion difference, although I don't have the percentage delta off the top of my head. Free samples of some kind are absolutely important in ebook sales. If you don't make a chapter available, if you don't make an extended passage available, people will walk away. And it sits right up there with availability of a book cover as being one of those major conversion drivers for us. What we're just starting to run experiments on right now is the relative value of different lengths of samples. So we're doing some extended samples that are longer than a chapter. We already have some books in that are shorter. It's hard to do unless you're actually willing to do a kind of a proper A/B test where a certain percentage of users get served up a smaller sample and a certain number get a larger sample, and the volume against that book is large enough that you can get a reasonable N on it. But we're really interested in it because, for the most part, when we've gone back to publishers, they've said, tell us what works. If it isn't 1 chapter, if it's 2 chapters, let's talk about it.
So do you have any rule of thumb for publishers as far as give us, you should always make sure X percent is always available?
Yeah, I mean, we basically look at sort of 1 chapter or 5% of the book. And, ideally start at the beginning. So don't take something random out of the sort of the 2nd or 3rd chapter. Let people start the book the way they would if they were in a store, and get a sense for it. I've got my, page 45 test where I kind of, flip, enough pages in that the story's underway. And if I want to get to page 46, that tends to be a book that I buy. So you need at least enough that you can do that. As opposed to just a table of contents and a couple of pages at the beginning. People should be able to get some momentum inside the book.
Right. Okay, so interesting question from Agatha here. Are the avatars that you selected indicative of the gender and age of the type of those users?
To a certain degree. I had a reasonably limited palette in the Me generator that was given to me, but eReader, e-ink customers do skew more female than male. iPad customers do tend to skew a little younger and more male. Smartphone does tend to skew a little more female and a little younger. And as far as we've been able to see, although they're also very resistant to surveying, Freakins tend to be more male than female.
Yeah, okay. And I don't know if this is starting to get into sort of proprietary space or not, and feel free to decline if you have to, but are you able to give us any sort of a breakdown in total sales by each of those users, like by percentage maybe even?
Yeah, that one I have to decline, sadly.
Okay. Well, I had to ask, right?
I know. No, you got to ask.
Yeah, okay. So how about what percentage of the customers are actually using Reading Life? Are you able to share that?
Oh, of the customers that are on iPhone and iPad, 98% of them have activated Reading Life, and then a large majority of those tend to continue to interact with Reading Life over time. And that may be as simple as going, oh, I got a badge, what's that for? But we're talking about millions of people who have who have received events. I'm going to say high hundreds of thousands, low millions who have actually shared events with other people. It's been really interesting to watch it grow.
Okay. So Agatha was wondering, how does Reading Life help a publisher like her?
There are a couple of opportunities that are starting to become available to publishers as we grow out Reading Life. So when we first started doing badging and awards, for example, it was all stuff that we created for ourselves. Now we're starting to have conversations with publishers about, are there particular behaviors that you as a publisher would like to see recognized? If everyone completes every work in a particular series, should something good happen to them from that? Could that be an offer from the publisher? Could it just be a point of recognition or kind of celebrating that achievement? And a lot of that for us is our experiments that we're doing with publishers to see what does motivate people to kind of go on to the next thing. So if you've read all 6 books in a particular series, is it a good thing for us to say, wow, that was actually that was a lot of reading. Congratulations, way to go.
Yeah.
Or and then is there something that we can do that can motivate a further behavior after that?
So I want to switch gears then, just talk for a second about hardware.
Yeah.
Obviously, the one-color e-ink display has sort of ruled the world for the last 3 or 4 years. What do you see as the future there? Is that going to continue to be pretty dominant, or is it going to be replaced maybe even the next year with the larger portion of especially new customers going more with a full-color tablet?
So what we've seen so far anyway is that even with a huge number of tablets now available, that most passionate reader, that someone who has a very high likelihood of consuming large numbers of books, is still actively acquiring an e-ink device and acquiring one as opposed to picking up a tablet, which is also available. So for whatever reason, and it could be everything from the price of e-ink devices just continues to go down, while tablets still remain relatively more expensive. It could be because they're looking for a more uninterrupted experience, a more simplified experience. A lot of them are not technology focused. They tend to be readers first, kind of tech acquirers second, and all of which may kind of drive them into e-ink. So then the question as you look a couple of years down the road is does that conversion of or convergence of screen quality, price point, ease of use start to kind of make those two streams of users kind of come together. We haven't seen it yet. We still see very different behaviors between someone who's on a tablet and someone who's on a dedicated reader, and that's with having one of the most popular e-reading applications for iPad. We know a fair bit about how that consumer behaves. And they are different. They don't read as much. They don't read as often. They don't buy as frequently. And that could be because there are all kinds of other things you can do on a tablet. It could be because those people who acquire those devices are not naturally as frequent readers as others. So if that convergence happens, it'll be interesting to see how reading behavior changes. But for me, I think that transition takes place as LCD starts to become easier to read on, as the price point continues to fall, and as it starts to become much more of an impulse purchase as opposed to what's still a reasonably significant technology investment.
Yeah, no doubt. And I have to admit I was wrong. A year ago, I was one of the first people in line locally to buy an iPad and tossed my e-ink based reader aside. And almost a year to the day, I went back and got another e-ink reader because I felt that I needed both. So I can see them both kind of coexisting for some time, at least in the future. Yeah. It's good to hear your point of view.
Well, and I mean, as folks like us continue to drive the price of that device down, I think it's safe to say, just with kind of the cost of build materials on an e-ink device relative to a tablet, it's going to be a long time before you can make a fully functional, richly functional tablet cost as little as kind of a single function e-reader. So there will always be that piece of the market that just wants to be able to read kind of as cheaply as possible.
Yep. So I think we've got time for one last question here. I'm going to hit you with a curveball, if that's all right. This is from Daniel, and he says he's noticed a lot of different formats for e-books, and will there be a universal standard at some point? So what are your thoughts on that? Loaded question, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, we've always embraced the EPUB standard, which is probably as close to a single format standard as the ebook industry has. And and are a strong proponent of there being the ability to kind of transfer books between services. So you can take a book out of Kobo and you can load it onto a Sony eReader, you can load it onto a Nook, you can load it into a desktop reader and be able to read that book in other places. You don't kind of have to stay within our ecosystem to be able to read. Most of our competitors just don't believe that. Amazon maintains a proprietary standard. Apple maintains a proprietary standard. They would really like you to be able to buy a book and stay there forever. And I think that's one of the things that people have to be conscious of is, do you want your ebook purchase to really be a bet that you're going to stay with a particular retailer forever? It's kind of like buying a set of IKEA bookshelves in college and then having to keep them in your house for the rest of your life. And so I think that portability and transportability is a very big deal, and I think that books do stay in our lives for a long time. So standardization continues to be a big thing, and especially as there's a proliferation of devices, as there's a proliferation of capabilities, the last thing you want is to see a great new reading device out there and go, damn, I can't take my books there. I'm not allowed to go there. I'm going to have to stay here where I am. And so for that reason, we're all about pushing universal standards for ebooks.
Yeah, and I know it's insanely wishful thinking on my part, but I'm looking forward to a day when every device has an app on it for every other platform. So just like on the iPad today, I can use the Kobo reader, I can use the BNN reader, I can use the Amazon reader. I'd love to see that on every other device too, so that if I happen to buy a Kobo reader, I could load up somebody else's reader app and their books, and may the best hardware win, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, to be honest, as a publisher, you're in a much better position to advocate for that than others. I mean, in the end of the day, all of us retailers have to come to you for the content that we sell. And that gives you a certain amount of influence over the kind of experience that should be wrapped around that. So take that banner and run with it.
Right, absolutely. Well, okay, so that's all we've got time for. I want to apologize to everybody in the audience for questions we did not get to. We just had way too many, and there were a lot of good ones. Michael, I'll do my best to gather them up and see if there's some other forum where we can provide answers for folks. But I also want to thank you, Michael, for a terrific presentation full of facts and figures, and again, worthy of a second viewing on the archived version. And we'll get that information and the link out to everybody as soon as possible as well. So that's all for today. Again, thanks to everybody for participating, and we'll talk to you again soon.